The desert floor is still warm from the afternoon sun, but the woman lying face down in the sand has stopped feeling temperature. The year is 1851, the 14th day of March, and the wagon train that was supposed to carry the Oatman family to California lies in scattered wreckage across a quarter-mile of Arizona territory. Her name is Mary Ann Oatman. She is 17 years old. She was, until approximately 2 hours ago, traveling with her parents, her 4 brothers, and her 2 sisters toward what the family believed would be a new life in the fertile lands of the Pacific coast. Her parents are dead. She watched her father's skull crushed with a war club while he tried to negotiate for the family's lives. She watched her mother fall beside him, her younger siblings scattered and screaming as warriors moved through the camp with methodical violence. She herself was struck. She can feel the blood matting her hair where the blow landed, but somehow she is still alive, still conscious, still aware of what is happening around her even though she cannot move, cannot speak, cannot do anything except lie in the sand and listen. She can hear the warriors gathering the survivors. She can hear the voices of her sisters, Olive, 15 years old, and Mary Ann, 7, crying somewhere nearby. She can hear her brother Lorenzo groaning from wherever he fell, not dead but wounded badly enough that the warriors have apparently decided he is not worth taking. She can hear the sounds of the family's possessions being sorted, the wagon being stripped of anything useful, the methodical efficiency of people who have done this many times before. She does not yet understand that she will die here, in this sand, from wounds that the warriors have decided are too severe to be worth treating. She does not yet understand that her sisters will be taken, will begin a journey into captivity that will last years, that will transform them into something their family would not recognize, that will end for one of them in death, and for the other in a return to white society so traumatic that she will spend the rest of her life trying to reconcile who she was with, who she became. What Mary Ann Oatman does understand, in her final hours of consciousness, is that everything her family believed about their journey westward was wrong. They believed they were traveling through empty land toward opportunity. They were traveling through the homeland of peoples who had lived here for centuries, peoples who were fighting a war for survival against the waves of settlers pushing into their territory, peoples who had developed specific practices for dealing with captives that Mary Ann's family had never imagined. The Tonto Apache warriors who attacked the Oatman wagon train were not acting randomly. They were operating according to patterns that their culture had developed over generations, patterns for raiding, for selecting captives, for processing those captives through experiences that would determine whether they lived or died, whether they were adopted into Apache society or traded to other peoples, whether they remained forever outsiders or became, in some transformed sense, Apache themselves. What happened to Olive and Mary Ann Oatman over the following years, and what happened to hundreds of other women who were taken captive during the Apache Wars of the 19th century, is what tonight's video will reveal. This is not the romanticized captivity of frontier mythology. This is not the simplified narrative of savage Indians and innocent settlers. This is the documented reality of what captive women experience, the selection process, the breaking period, the transformation that Apache Captivity was designed to produce. It is brutal, it is systematic, and it is recorded in sources ranging from captivity narratives written by survivors to military reports to anthropological studies of Apache culture conducted before traditional practices were lost. This is what the Apache did to their captives. This is what the sources document. This is what you were never taught. What you are about to learn has been sanitized, romanticized, and distorted in most accounts of the American frontier. You know about the Apache Wars in general terms. You have heard of Geronimo and Cochise, of the military campaigns that eventually confined the Apache peoples to reservations, of the conflict between expanding American settlement and indigenous resistance. You may have encountered captivity narratives in literature classes, presented as a genre of frontier writing without much attention to the actual experiences they describe. But you have never learned what captivity actually involved. You have never heard about the specific stages through which Apache captives were processed, the initial selection that determined who lived and who died, the breaking period that destroyed previous identity, the integration protocols that transformed survivors into functional members of Apache society or prepared them for trade to other peoples. You have never encountered the detailed accounts that survivors left of practices that they struggled to describe in language their audiences could understand. Tonight, you will discover what the historical sources reveal about Apache captivity in the 19th century. You will learn about the cultural logic that governed captive taking, not random cruelty, but structured practice serving specific purposes within Apache society. You will learn about the stages of captivity that survivors describe with remarkable consistency across different times and circumstances. You will learn about the physical and psychological techniques that transformed captives into something other than what they had been. You will learn about Olive Oatman, who was 15 years old when she was captured, and who spent 5 years in captivity before being ransomed back to white society. Her face marked with the tattoos that identified her as a captive and that she would carry for the rest of her life. About Sarah Ann Horn, who was captured in Texas and who left one of the most detailed accounts of the early stages of Apache captivity. About Larsena Pennington Page, who was captured in 1860 and whose story reveals the specific practices used to break resistant captives. About the unnamed women documented in military records whose fates can be reconstructed from fragments that soldiers and officials recorded. You will learn these things from primary sources, from the captivity narratives that survivors wrote or dictated, from military and government records, from anthropological studies conducted when Apache elders still remembered traditional practices, from archaeological evidence that confirms what written sources describe. The reality of Apache captivity is documented in sources that have been available to scholars for over a century, but that popular understanding continues to ignore. Subscribe if you want to understand what the American frontier actually looked like for those who experienced it as captives rather than as settlers or soldiers. Comment below telling me where in the world you are watching from. Because Mary Ann Oatman is lying in the Arizona sand, taking her final breaths, and her sisters are being gathered with the other survivors. And I am going to tell you exactly what happened next, what the sources document, what the captives experienced, and what the evidence reveals about practices that shaped the lives of hundreds of women across decades of frontier conflict. But first, I need to explain the cultural context that made Apache captivity different from what most people imagine. The Apache peoples, a term covering multiple distinct groups, including the Chiricahua, Mescalero, Western Apache, Lipan, Jicarilla, and others had practiced captive taking for centuries before European contact. Captives served multiple functions within Apache society, and understanding these functions is essential for understanding what captives experienced. The first function was demographic replacement. Apache warfare, like warfare among many indigenous peoples, produced casualties that threatened community survival. Captives, particularly women and children who could be integrated into Apache bands, helped offset these losses. A woman who was successfully transformed into an Apache wife and mother contributed to the community's future in ways that simply killing her would not. The second function was labor. Apache economy depended on work that captives could perform, processing hides, gathering food, maintaining camps, caring for children. A captive who proved capable and compliant could become a valuable economic asset, contributing labor that freed Apache women and men for other activities. The third function was trade. Captives were valuable commodities in the extensive trade networks that connected different indigenous peoples across the Southwest. A captive taken by Apache raiders might be traded to Comanche, Navajo, or other peoples, exchanged for horses, weapons, or other goods that the Apache valued. This trade function meant that captives' fates were not always determined by their Apache captors. They might pass through multiple owners and multiple cultures during their captivity. The fourth function was revenge and psychological warfare. Captive-taking terrorized enemy populations in ways that simple killing could not. The knowledge that capture meant not quick death, but prolonged captivity, with all that captivity involved, made frontier settlements fear Apache raids in ways that shaped settlement patterns, military deployments, and political decisions. Captives were weapons of psychological warfare as well as economic assets. The fifth function was ritual and status. The taking of captives demonstrated warrior prowess in ways that enhanced status within Apache society. A warrior who returned from a raid with captives had proven his skill and courage. The treatment of those captives, whether harsh or lenient, reflected the warrior's status and his band's circumstances. These functions shaped every aspect of how captives were treated. The selection process determined which captives served which functions. The breaking process prepared captives for their assigned roles. The integration or trade processes completed the transformation from enemy outsider to economic asset. Nothing in the system was random, even when it appeared chaotic to captives who did not understand the cultural logic governing their treatment. The Oatman family stumbled into this system without understanding any of it. They were traveling through Apache territory during a period of intensifying conflict between Apache peoples and American settlers. They were poorly armed, poorly informed, and traveling in a group too small to defend itself effectively. When Tonto Apache warriors encountered them, the family represented an opportunity for plunder, for captives, for sending a message to other settlers about the costs of entering Apache territory. The attack followed patterns that Apache raiders had refined over generations. The warriors assessed the target, identified its vulnerabilities, struck with overwhelming force at the optimal moment, and efficiently processed the aftermath, killing those not worth taking, selecting captives based on established criteria, gathering plunder, and withdrawing before any response could be organized. Olive and Mary Ann Oatman were selected because they met the criteria for valuable captives. They were female, which meant they could potentially be integrated into Apache society or traded at higher prices than male captives. They were young enough to be transformed through the captivity process, but old enough to perform useful labor. They were healthy enough to survive the journey that would follow. They were valuable. Their parents and brothers were killed because they did not meet these criteria. Adult men were dangerous. They might resist, might attempt escape, might cause problems that exceeded their value. The younger children were too young to survive the rigors of